Pucks with Haggs
is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 127th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We are getting up there in the numbers quite a bit. Today with me, I have Boston.com's Conor Ryan. Conor, thanks very much for joining us, my friend.
Yep, thanks for having me.
You got it. Always a pleasure on my part to have you on. We're going to go through a little bit of the preseason game last night, the 5-2 loss to the Rangers at Madison Square Garden, and we're also going to have a little bit of a mailbag episode here. We're going to answer some always favored fan questions, some always colorful questions coming our way. But first, I want to get to the sponsors real quick. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. So you want to download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks run your game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets also with Game Time. So, download Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase of concert tickets, sports tickets, comedy tickets, all kinds of tickets. Use Game Time for that. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. First off, Conor, your impressions from the 5-2 loss at Madison Square Garden last night against the New York Rangers, the Bruins' third preseason game of the season. I thought Brandon Bussi was okay, not great. The Bruins definitely were okay, maybe less than okay, certainly not great at all. Just stomped in the first period, and that really set the tone for the rest of the game. There were some bright spots. There were some things that I liked. But what were your thoughts coming out of that game last night?
Yeah, I think my main focus, Joe, is still looking at Brandon Bussi. And as you said, wasn't all on him, 5-on-3, tough break at the start there.
Yep.
Some of the net front coverage in front of him was a little iffy, not a whole lot of support in front of him, but still, you kind of look at his first game on Sunday where, again, 10 saves on 12 shots. He kind of was knocking himself after that one because that Hedl goal he didn't really like. Even though he let up 4 goals on Thursday, had a lot of rebounds that you look at a few of those other guys that are really good at cleaning up in the net front, like Chris Kreider. Rangers had a lot of lineup regulars in that lineup. Could have probably been a whole lot worse. There were quite a few rebounds that are a little bit concerning there. Yep. I know even when Brandon Bussi was having really, really strong seasons down in Providence, that seems like it was the one thing that he always needs to kind of tighten up a little bit is the rebound control. Yep. So again, it's preseason. I'm not ready to end the Brandon Bussi experiment or anything like that after a few games, but I think it reinforces that this is still a guy who has a lot of promise. He's 26 years old, but you have to expect some of the growing pains if you are confident in going with him once the season opens. And it also, I think, once again reaffirms. Probably feel a little bit better about your team if you had Jeremy Swayman in net, and then you can figure out who's the number 2 behind him between Korpisalo and Bussi. If it's Korpisalo and Bussi on October 8th, you're opening the door to a lot more variance, I think, maybe in terms of what you're going to get in goaltending, at least at the start of the year.
Definitely. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You're definitely a little bit of sort of whistling past the graveyard with Bussi and Korpisalo a little bit and hoping for the best, but not quite sure what you're going to get out of those two if you started the year. It's definitely an unknown variable. With those two, Brandon Bussi, low hard shots. He was kicking out a lot of the low hard shots. They were going at him, and he was kicking them right out around the net. Definitely had some issues with rebound control. The one thing that the big, obviously they got dominated in the first period. They did not have a good first period. A lot of that was on the defense and the players around. And for most of the first 40 minutes of that game, it looked like Pasta and Zaka were out for a Sunday skate. They weren't really too invested in what was going on. I actually liked Patra at center with them, some of the puck possession stuff, some of the plays they were making. I thought he looked pretty good. But at the end of the day, that line finished -3 across the board, and they had a tough night where they were just getting their work in, and it didn't look like there was much invested in the game. But so some of that is definitely on the players in front of Bussi. But the one I look at and point at is the breakaway by Othman towards the end of the first period. He makes a nice move. He's in all alone. Zadorov cannot make a play on the puck and kind of gets burnt. Zadorov did not play well last night either. and he goes in and he makes a really good move on Bussy and he just toasts him on a breakaway. And they'd already given up 2 goals in the last 5 minutes of the first period, and that was really a killer. In any game during the regular season, that is going to be a momentum killer. That's a tough goal to give up. That's the one I look at with him and say, you got to make a stop there. And then that gives you some concern. The momentum might spin away from them at times during the regular season if he's the guy in net. So there's no question that was not in the daily drama soap opera of the Jeremy Swayman negotiations. It was point Swayman's camp last night in Swayman, with Bussy not looking great. The good news is at best he would be a backup in the situation as it is right now. Really, Korpisalo is the one you need to look at. And if he continues to play well and looks good, the Bruins, I think, are going to feel okay about where they are to start the year if they had to go with Bussy as backup and Korpisalo as starter. And really, I think he's the key in all of this. If he starts giving up goals like that and rebounds like that, then I think Swayman's looking awfully good to continue to make the demands that he wants to try to make, and the Bruins may have to bend a little bit. One thing I did like last night, and I thought one of the best players, if not the best player for the Boston Bruins, was Mark Kastelic. Physical, was blowing guys up, knocking guys over, got into a fight at one point because he was really hard on the forecheck and blew somebody up. Tips home a goal by paying the price in front and getting his body there and winning a battle. And, he looks like he looks like the player you hoped that he was going to be coming from Ottawa to add to that fourth line. And quite frankly, the kind of player that fourth line really hasn't had the last few years, that sort of veteran, heavy physical, tough guy that can drop the gloves, intimidator. Garnet Hathaway was kind of that kind of player too, but that's the last guy in the last few years that I feel like they've had that's been anything like that. And they obviously only had him for a short amount of time. So it's been a couple of preseasons games now for Kastelic, and he really looks like he's going to be a factor and he's going to be something to look at in the fourth line. He's going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you look at what he brings. Even before you saw him in game action, he was known as a guy that is physical. He's 6'4", really, really good at face-offs, which helps you there.
Yep.
But I also think you just look at his motor, right? Even though he's 6'4", it's kind of the same as like a guy like Beecher, who's 6'3", 216, but doesn't look like that when he's skating, right? And I think it remains to be seen how that fourth line all kind of shakes out between him, Beecher, Max Jones, who's obviously banged up, but it seems like that's the guy they wanted to take a look at. Riley Duran, however it kind of shakes out that quartet or whoever else maybe gets into that mix. I do kind of like how their fourth line seems to be a group that should be more physical, but also they play with speed. They play really aggressively on the forecheck. They close in quick. And I think in especially today's NHL, when you're looking at how you're building your fourth line, you look at some of the best ones out there of what the Panthers bring. You look at for years it was Carolina with Jordan Martinook and Jesper Foss and all these guys that maybe aren't the biggest, strongest guys, but they will close in and make your life miserable on the forecheck. And I think having a guy like Kastelic as maybe the engine of that fourth line, and having, seeing what Beecher could do with another year, where a guy like Max Jones, who had double-digit goals last year and brings a lot of energy and is also 6'3". I kind of like how the composition of that fourth line is shaping out. Again, we'll see, even if a guy like Riley Duran's in the mix, who, always seems to be a guy that Ryan Muchinel has spoken highly of, and seems like he's on the cusp of NHL reps. I do think there's a lot to be excited about that fourth line. And Kastelic, who, first game comes in hot, right, with two offensive zone penalties. I think afterwards he's more or less I was a little bit more geared up. I don't think you're expecting all that from him during regular season games, but a guy that's physical, draws a ton of penalties. I noticed that last year. Him and Jones, I think, were top 10 in terms of drawing penalties. It's kind of like what Lauko did last year, and you kind of need those kinds of things on that fourth line. He checks off a lot of boxes of what you're trying to get out of that part of the lineup.
Yeah, and you need that, especially if you're the Boston Bruins and you continue to have that habit of taking a lot of penalties, that you want to be able to draw some to offset that a little bit too, so it's not the differential is not too crazy as far as power plays that you're getting and giving up. And it just, it speaks to Kastelic's ability. He's one of those players that will drag you into the battle. He's one of those guys that will get stuff going. I've loved Kuntar in this camp too, because I think he's a guy that's really been stirring it up and that is really getting involved. And even if he's not scoring, holding on to the puck, all that stuff, he's in the middle of the mix and you notice him. And I think that's a good thing for a lot of those young guys. Riley Duran, also to your point, 6'2" and can skate. He's another guy that would fit right in as a big body that can move and has a little bit more skill than you think he does and would be a really nice fit there. Zadorov, as I mentioned, struggled. He had some turnovers. That empty net goal at the end was him just kind of fumbling a pass to McAvoy, throwing it at his feet, and that turned into a quick empty net goal. Game over right there. Couldn't come up with the puck on the breakaway that Othman scored. Took a cross-checking penalty that I thought was like very questionable. That was a light tap to the back.
It's the strongest man in the world, apparently.
Seriously. And he's obviously going to bring the physical end of it. I have no questions about that. But are there any questions in the back of your mind as to whether he, even though style-wise, I think he's a good fit for McAvoy and he should free up McAvoy for more offense and be a sheriff out there that's going to cause some of those hits on McAvoy to go away a little bit? Is there a little bit of concern in your mind just about him being able to handle sort of the workload of a top-pairing defenseman, given that he really hasn't traditionally been a 21, 22, 23-minute guy in a lot of the places that he's played? And this might be asking the most that anybody's ever asked of him. I think he's going to be up for it. I really like him as a player, and he gives, a lot of things that the Bruins needed, especially during the playoffs. I think he's going to add so much value to this team. But are there questions about whether he's going to end up being the long-term guy to play with McAvoy, given the kind of pressure that's going to be on them playing against the other team's best players?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there probably is a little bit of a not gamble, it's probably too strong of a word, right? But in terms of, I think the Bruins, when they signed him, are banking on, I think what you saw last year with Vancouver, especially in the playoffs, where he was arguably like their most impactful defenseman other than Quinn Hughes. He was doing it all. I mean, I don't think you're signing him to do end-to-end goals like he had in that one series with Vancouver, right? But he was really poised with the puck, was obviously bringing the physicality, kind of the bread and butter of his game, but it's kind of like what you saw from like Lorei last year in the playoffs, where it's like, was poised with the puck, wasn't making mistakes, was confident, and wasn't putting his team in a bad spot. I think that's what you're asking for a guy like Zadorov. Yes, you signed him to, launch guys into the glass and be physical and be a sheriff and all those things, but it's also just cutting down some of those plays where you want to rip your hair out. I think that's kind of what was the knock against Zadorov in previous years. I think the Bruins were on their West Coast trip. It was like the same trip where Ullmark had the goalie goal. So they're out in Western Canada and they were playing Calgary, and there was like an odd man rush. And I think Zadorov, I remember, went out of position to light up Pavel Zacha and led to like an easy breakaway goal. And that's those things. And I think some of the times it comes with the territory that there's probably going to be one or two of these games where as you're a Bruin fan, you're going to be like, what the hell was that? But as long as I think those things kind of get ironed out or they don't, sprout up too often, you'll take what he brings every single night, which is the physicality, kind of underrated, mobility that I think he does provide, retrieving pucks, those kinds of things. So is it all going to be perfect? Absolutely not. It's hockey. It's defensemen playing a lot of minutes, but I think as long as you kind of iron those out and continue to kind of play to your strengths of your Zadorov, I think what he brings gives you a lot more value than the occasional misplay or two where it's going to drive you maybe crazy for a couple of minutes. But knowing Bruins fans, they'll see that, be mad like he misses a coverage, and then he's going to light up someone back on the bandwagon. So I think Bruins fans are going to like what he brings night in and night out, especially.
Yeah, and I think they pay even bigger dividends, like his skill set and what he brings to the table as far as the heaviness, the physicality, just being an absolute, as Brad Marchand called him, a predator, which he definitely is. That's going to pay even bigger dividends in the playoffs. When you need players like that, you need tone setters, you need guys that are just going to absolutely make it a miserable, torturous experience to get to the front of their net, and he's going to do that. He is going to make it miserable for players on the other team. There's no doubt about that. And just his style of play, he plays very much in the Big Bad Bruins style. So I think the traditional way that the Bruins play hockey and what their fans expect, I think Zadorov is going to bring a ton of that to the table, even if he does occasionally go out of position or, really go for the hit and sort of go for the momentum shifting play, even if it's not technically what he should be doing. I think they're even going to forgive that. I chalk last night up to getting his work in, similar to Pastrnak, Zacha, some of those other guys. He's getting the kinks out. That was his first preseason game. So a lot of the veterans, I'm not going to judge at all on anything that they're doing right now. They're just there to, fulfill the veteran quota that needs to go to a preseason game on the road and get their game work in. So, I still continue to expect good things to him. And he did throw some bodies around while the game was going on. I want to take a break from the show to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks, a great sponsor of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. Right now, you could go with Tyreek Hill for more than 90 yards receiving and Dak Prescott for more than 263 passing yards, Josh Allen for less than 240 passing yards, and my boy CeeDee Lamb on my fantasy football team for more than 96 receiving yards. Or you could go with my guy Kyler Murray after he helped blow up the Cardinals offense last week and really has shown now that he's all the way back from injuries. So that's my special pick is Kyler Murray. Go with him to put up big numbers across the board, rushing, passing, TDs, all of it. Right now, one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. You can also now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. What is better than that? PrizePicks, run your game. Anything else in your mind from last night before we move on that stuck out as far as the players you were watching?
Yeah, I mean, I know you kind of touched on it, but I think Kuntar is a guy that always seems to keep on popping up in terms of how, physical he is. I think for a guy like that who's, only going into his second full pro season, right? Yep. So I think already at this point in your career, already kind of know, like, I'm well aware what my identity has to be. And I think you see it every single time he's out there. It's like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to hit someone, I'm going to hang around the net front, I'm going to bug guys after the whistle. Like that seems like for a guy that
cross-check somebody into oblivion.
Yes, exactly. And then the same guy ends up hitting him, and then he goes up and wants to start a fight with him. Like, and again, for a guy like that who, I think that always can sometimes be like a transition for some of these younger players is like, what am I at the next level? Feels like Kuntar's like, I know what my path is, and I'm going to do it every single time I'm out there, and you're going to notice me every single time I'm out there. And what do you know? Like, is he a guy that is now pushing himself for a spot October 8th? Probably not. But like you look at the energy he brings, physicality, when injuries inevitably do pop up as the year goes on, he's probably going to be one of the first guys to look at a Providence and be like, we could use someone like that. So I think he's a guy that seems like he knows what kind of player he needs to be and is kind of carrying it out there. He came in kind of with a plan this camp, and so far he's been noticeable. I think it's encouraging to see a player like that who seems like he knows what he has to do to get to the NHL in due time.
Yeah, I know it kills you to say that about a Boston College guy, but I also
a lot of Eagles Haggs on this
you're
camp.
Surrounded. This is true. But I think he's going to be a bottom 6 guy at points in the NHL. Like I'm just starting to see it. I think he totally gets what he's supposed to do, how he's supposed to play. He does it consistently. You know what you're going to get out of him. Like he seems to be figuring out the line of like how to agitate and how to draw people in without like really hurting his team, at least getting matching penalties, if not getting a power play out of it. And he's got a little bit of skill too. Like he's a hard nose. He knows what he's doing around as far as going to the net and getting loose pucks around there and cleaning up the trash around the net. Like that's always going to be his bread and butter. That's how he scored a lot of goals at BC. Like he's always been that guy. And I think he understands that's who he's going to be as a player. And I think that's so key to getting into those sort of role player sort of roster spots at the NHL level. And I think we're going to see him at some point in Boston. And I think he'll have a decent NHL career because, he gets it. Let's move on to some of the questions. This is from a lot of letters on Twitter with a lot of like caps and small letter stuff going on in the in his name, in his handle. Any news on the Swayman contract? There are a lot of sources coming out with different situations. Sway holding out until December 1st, not playing this year, going overseas for a year, a deal getting done by training camp today, tomorrow. Any news or anything that you think has developed recently on the Swayman front, or even better, sort of what's your feeling as to what the end game is going to be at this point, Con?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to kind of project what you're looking for. I mean, you've had recent reports saying that both the Bruins and Swayman are interested in a long-term deal. So if that is the case, then I think it all comes down to what the value on that contract is. And I think that's where the biggest probably gap is, right? Because you look from Swayman's camp, who's trying to, whether he's trying to, set the new floor for the goalie market, whether he's trying to gauge how like the cap is going to jump up the next couple of years and wants it to age well over time as opposed to it being 6.5, 7, by 2030, 2031, something like that. And then from the Bruins perspective, you have a guy who has showed a lot of promise, but he's only played 44 games in a full season. Like, even if you think he could be a guy pushing for a Vezina in a year or two, you still want more of that tangible production, that track record before you hand a guy $8.5 million, $9.5 million, whatever it is. So I think you're still waiting for one of these sides to make a concession. You'd like to ideally meet in the middle somewhere. Like, and what does that in the middle mean, right? Is it 7.5? Is it 8? Right now, I think there's only 4 active goalies in the league making over 6.25. So it's tough to kind of find that median, that middle ground where both sides are going to be happy. It feels like whenever pen is put to paper, both sides aren't going to be thrilled because there has to be some concessions, right? But sooner or later, you have to get to that point. And also, like, you look at the Rangers, who are right now working with Igor Shesterkin on a new contract, and they're thinking that could be 11 and 11.5. If you're the Bruins, get Swayman signed to something at 7.5, 8, and be happy with it. Because I feel like once Shesterkin signs, you got Jake Ottinger in another year or so. You got a lot of other guys with longer resumes and more credentials who are due up for contracts next. So the sooner you get this done, the better. Because it does feel like the goalie market is going to shift. But I think it's more because of those guys as opposed to Swayman, who, again,
correct, really
promising goalie. But I think you need to see a little bit more before you're comfortable saying he's a guy making $8.5, $9 million a year.
Yeah, I think it's a wrong way to think about this if you're worried about it looking like a bad contract for Swayman when Shesterkin, Bobrovsky, Ottinger, some of these other guys sign their next deals. I think that's a wrong way of looking at this because he is not in their class. He's not in the class of any of those goalies as of right now. He just isn't. Like, you have to play, you have to be a number one guy for at least a year or two. You have to, like, be in the Vezina Trophy mix. You have to, like, do all these things before you're going to get paid like that. Every single goalie that is getting paid that kind of money has played like 55 to 65 games in a year before. And most of them, the big money guys right now, have won Vezina Trophies before they got that kind of money. And I think you're going to start seeing you have to have at least been a finalist in a season, if you can start commanding that money, or maybe be in the top 5, like some criteria that says you are one of the best goalies in the league besides like going to the All-Star game. Like, that's not enough. I think you need to do more in order to get to that point. And I think I agree with you. I don't think anybody doubts Swayman's potential. I don't think anybody doubts the ceiling is tremendously high for him, that he will be an elite goalie. He will be a number one guy. He should be the guy for the next 10 years in Boston. He should be the next guy that takes the baton from Tim Thomas to Tuukka Rask to Linus Ullmark, now to Jeremy Swayman. And you're talking about goaltending excellence for the last 20 years in the Boston Bruins organization. It's kind of become a hallmark for that organization, is the great goaltending that they've had. And he's the next great one. I have no doubt about that. But he's not in a position right now to be commanding an 8-year deal for huge money. It's just not. If he's looking 8 years and he's trying to get, like what we've heard from Spit and Chicklets and other places, the McAvoy contract or the Vasilevsky contract, if you will, which I think is the more relevant person to talk to as far as comparables go. He's not getting that. He should not be asking for that. Like, you can ask for it, I guess. That could be your opening line to say, this is what I'm getting. But I think his value is probably a lot closer to the 4-year, $6.2 million that the Bruins supposedly offered him as their first offer. Like, I think 4 years, $7 million a year is a pretty fair contract. Maybe even go to 7.5, and you're not happy if you're the Bruins, and it gets him done, and it gets, you moving to the next one. And then he's like 29 and he can sign a huge contract at that point to, once the goalie market goes through the roof, he can cash in as long as he performs well. But I just don't think it's the right time and place for him right now to really get that massive deal that he wants to get. It's, unfortunate timing for him. But, to be honest with you, the way this should have gone, looking back on it now in hindsight, maybe the Bruins should have taken him to arbitration. Maybe they should have gone that route. Maybe they should have gone for 2 years in arbitration last year and locked him in.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, that's they kind of did right by him in terms of being like, hey, listen. Last year we had to go to arbitration. It wasn't ideal. No one enjoys arbitration. Bruins also had no money last year. Like
Yep.
they weren't really in a position to do that. Whereas if there was ever a year to kick the can down the road, it was last year. And they also, again, they could have signed him and locked him into whatever it was, 3.475 to a 2-year deal. Gave him a 1-year deal being like, all right, we're going to have money next year. Let's sort this things out. And now they're stuck at this impasse. Like,
Yep.
I think for Jeremy Swayman and his camp, I think it's eventually going to come down to what do you actually want right now, right? Because if you want an 8-year deal, you're going to have to make some concessions there. Well, you're going to get a pay raise. Like, hell, like it might be 7.5. And if you're the Bruins, you deal with it.
Yep.
And it's still, banking on potential. And if it all works out, you probably got a really good goalie at a really good market value in a couple of years. But if you're Swayman, is that what you want? Do you want security more than anything else? Or is it you want to get paid? Because if that's the case, then yeah, like we're going to have to give you a bridge deal. We need to see more of it. Like, and you'll take 4 and get a nice pay raise anyway. But then you can hit the market again at 30. So what do you want? Do you want security or do you want the payout? Because I don't think right now you can have both in terms of 8 by 8.5, 8
Yep.
9 million, something like that. Like
Yep.
right now, it's just not tenable. And
Not to mention, Connor, the Bruins don't have that money in cap space to do that. Like a $9 million. Like you're talking about if Swayman demands that and his camp demand that, and they end up getting that, you're going to have to move players from this team. Like you're talking about hurting the current roster that you have because you need to get a win in these negotiations. And you need maybe, some are characterizing this as Swayman is salty still about the arbitration thing. And he wants to win this negotiation as sort of payback for what happened in arbitration. And I'm telling you right now, if that is what he is, if that's his motivation, if that's what he wants is an out and out win in this negotiation against Don Sweeney and the Bruins, he's going to end up getting traded. Like if he wants a win and he's going to hold out for the win and that's what he cares most about. And that's his priority. And he's willing to sort of hurt the team in order to do it. They're going to trade him. They're going to sign, like he'll sign on December 1st. They'll sign him to a short term, like a 1-year deal. And they'll end up moving him someplace else. And they have full control over where they can move him to. I just think if he doesn't end up at some point, coming back to earth with what his expectations are and what they want in a deal and coming to some kind of compromise with the Bruins, I just don't see this ending well for him because I don't think the Bruins are going to want to send a message to everybody else that, players can do this.
Yeah, and I mean, also, don't forget, Don Sweeney will be the first one to remind everyone that Jeremy Swayman and his representatives took them to arbitration.
Yes.
So,
100%.
Again, listen, it is a business. We all know that. But from the Bruins' perspective, I could also see them at this point where it is now September 27th, training regular season starting in 10-plus days.
Yep.
And you've got a goalie not signed who took you to arbitration. You kind of threw him a bone by giving him a 1-year deal, knowing that this was going to get resolved, and now you're stuck in this impasse now. You can see where both sides, I think, are probably pretty dug in right now in terms of the Bruins being like, listen, we're willing to work with you. Do you want the long-term deal? Do you want the bridge deal, knowing that we'll probably pay you down the road anyway when the cap jumps up to $105 million, whatever it's supposed to be by 2030? Like, they have solutions for it, but I could also see why at this point, when you look at all that's kind of gone on, why both sides aren't really budging right now, whether it's Swayman and his camp, who's, Swayman, I think, has never been one to lack confidence in his own ability and has a lot of conviction. But from the Bruins' perspective, it's, the same thing. Like, this should have been done probably a month or so ago. Like, why is it still dragging on like that? Nor are we going to make absurd concessions just to fit what we don't think is right now in terms of what the contract is. So you look at all that's in play, and it's a fascinating deal in terms of the timing, the sample size, all that stuff. Like, whenever this deal gets announced, and we know it's going to be like the Bruins are going to tweet a GIF of like Jeremy Swayman putting his mask down, and we know like a release is dropping in 5 minutes. Like, I will be fascinated to see what the term and the payout is, because I have no clue as to right now what it's going to end up being, because someone's going to have to make concessions.
Yeah, no doubt. As far as answering some of the other questions here, he will play this year. He's going to sign by December 1st and play because he is not going to want to lose the year of service time and push off being a UFA for another year, because he still has 2 years to go before he's a UFA. So he's not going to want to push that even further down the road at this point. So he will play. He's not going to go overseas for the year. That's not going to happen. It's just going to be interesting to see how all of it plays out. And if it gets to that point, if he starts missing regular season time. And to your point, how Korpisalo and how Bussy play and how that plays into like the desperation level of the Boston Bruins to get him in once the regular season really starts going. So all of that, I think, is going to be really fascinating. This is from Tony M. When do we start worrying about Swayman and Lindholm? And let's focus on Elias Lindholm here, Connor. Was on the ice for the first practice, I believe, has not been out there practicing since. Patra was centering Zacha and Pastrnak in his spot last night. He looked really good that first day. They looked like they had some good chemistry running drills and doing all that stuff. And we are talking about a guy who I think 6 times in his career has played 80-plus games, played 75 games last year. So we're not talking about an injury-prone player that, sits out when he's got a little boo-boo and an ouchie. This is a guy that, will go out there and compete. And I'm sure something's bothering him right now if he's not out there, even though the Bruins are saying it's, precautionary. Like, let's be honest, like he wouldn't have missed this much time if it's precautionary. Is it time to start worrying about Lindholm in any way, shape, or form?
I wouldn't say so yet. We'll see what happens next week when he should be back. That's what Jim Montgomery mentioned on Wednesday, that anyone who's not on the ice right now, so that's Lindholm, Max Jones, a few of these other guys. I know Justin Brazeau had a maintenance day on Wednesday as well. Everyone should be back by next week, which is promising. I know Elias Lindholm also just welcomed a new baby to the family, I think yesterday too. So some of that's also playing into it, I'm sure. Yep. But in terms of the overall injury, not raising the alarm yet, not going to DEFCON 1. We'll see next week where he is and what he can provide. Obviously, I think you'd like to see him get
Connor, let me stop you for 1 second and give you much respect because you know how to actually use DEFCON the proper way. Everybody says DEFCON 1 is the biggest emergency.
I've learned my lesson because I think before I would say DEFCON 5 and it'd be the one rogue educated person letting me know that I was doing it the wrong way. So yes, DEFCON 1, everyone. But no, I think you look at what Elias Lindholm can provide with this team. Obviously, he's going to be key. You'd like to see him get into a preseason game, at least 1 or 2 before the regular season starts. Also a guy that I feel like you can kind of plug in. And as you said, you look at what he provided, what he showcased in that first practice on that Thursday with Pastrnak. I expect him to kind of pick things up right away. He's a guy that's a smart player, will be at the bumper on the power play. Has a track record of elevating his game with some really strong line mates. You saw how elite that Calgary line with him, Gaudreau, and Tkachuk was. He's a guy that can be right there with these elite players and drive play as well. So I'm not worried about
goals and 80 points that year.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not expecting maybe that from him this year, but I think he could absolutely be a guy that if he's in the lineup every day can be a 60-point two-way face-off guy that can really impact the game. So right now I'm not worried about it. I think he's enough of a veteran that also you put him with Pastrnak, should be fine. Don't have to really worry about it. Pasternak's like the crock pot. You just put him with anyone, don't worry about it, set it, and you'll be all set. But I do think that's I'm not worried about it right yet in terms of where Lindholm is, even with him being out last couple of days.
No, he's a 29-year-old guy. He's played a lot of games in the NHL. Like, he's a veteran guy that can kind of coast through most of the training camp and then really start to get ready the last week to 10 days. So as long as he's on the ice at some point soon, I'd say within the next week, I'm not going to be too concerned about it. And I do think he'll pick up right away with Zacha and with Pastrnak. I mean, you would like to have him out there maybe for power play stuff to work on that and get him, as a presence in the bumper to get used to what he's going to do there and to work on the chemistry with that unit. So hopefully they're able to do that. But that's also something, you could practice a few days before the season starts and really start to get into a groove as far as what you need from him. So I'm not really concerned at this point either. We'll see how the next week goes, and then maybe we'll raise the DEFCON level. Maybe it's at 5 right now, but we're not even close to 1. We'll be back to show in a minute, but let's thank our sponsors right here. And then right now we've got Game Time. Do you remember your first NFL football game? I do. I remember going into the New England Patriots and the Cincinnati Bengals. It was 1985. It was the last game of the regular season, and the Patriots had to win to clinch a wild card spot in the playoffs. And what did they do? They went out and beat the Bengals. They won the game. And I honestly remember this game very vividly because I was 11 years old at the time. And after the game was over, all the fans stormed the field, ran down, ripped off the goalposts, and carried it right out of the stadium. I wanted to go down and do it and join the crowd. My dad said, absolutely not. There is no friggin' way you're going down there. And that was my first memory of seeing an NFL football game live. It was an awesome game. It was back in the Tony Collins, Steve Grogan, Tony Eason era, Stanley Morgan, all those guys, Andre Tippett. Great time to be a Patriots fan. But that brings me back to Game Time and going to NFL football now and going to a Patriots game at this point and how great that is. Wouldn't you want to have tickets to any of those games? Well, that's what you can get at Game Time. You take the guesswork out of buying tickets for NFL football, for Major League Baseball, for concerts, for comedy, for whatever. You take the guesswork out of getting those tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. There's so many great features with Game Time. All-in pricing, toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Game Time is the gold standard when it comes to buying tickets for pro sports, for entertainment, for anything. So I'm going to tell you one more time. You want to download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, this is from Ken. This is one of the Boston Sports Journal Q&A questions from this week. I like to sprinkle a few of these in here as well. As much as I'd love to see one of the kids bust out and take the second line right wing, and I'm pulling for Patra there, isn't the smarter play just to keep them in Providence to start the year? It's a long season, and there's really no need to win October like we've been doing, only to fade later on. Let the kids battle it out in Providence, and we'll call them up depending on who's hungriest. Isn't that the better play here, or is that just playing it too safe? What do you think, Connor? I think that's fine. The more I see out of Patra, the more I think he may start the year in Boston, because I think he's been pretty good, and he's looked like the guy he was, not as productive, offense-wise, but I still think he's showing a lot of the same stuff he did last year, and he certainly looks healthy, looks ready to go. He looks a tad faster. He definitely looks stronger on pucks, too. There's a lot of things to like about what he's doing, and he looks to me like he's an NHL player in training camp to this point. I think Merkulov and Lysell, they played better in the second game. But I think what Brad Marchand had to say the other day was very interesting about saying it's a really long way to go for both of those guys. And that, playing pretty well is not even close to winning an NHL roster spot. And I think that's 100% correct. So I think most of the young guys will start in Providence. Wouldn't shock me one iota if Lysell and Merkulov end up in Providence. But Patra's a guy I think that the more I see, the more I feel better about, him potentially being on the NHL roster to start the year, especially if he shows that he can play wing and center and could be like that right wing guy with Marchand and Coyle potentially.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with Patra, where I think going into the year, it's where you now have the option to send him to Providence. I was like, all right, well, see what he can provide. But coming off of major shoulder surgery, there's nothing wrong with starting him in Providence, giving him 10 games down there where he's going to be top line, top power play, have him, put up some points, feel confident about his game, then bring him back up. You look at what he's showed so far, though, as you said, he's not maybe lighting up the stat sheet or anything like that, but he looks like an NHLer, right? The poise he has with the puck, him being able to protect pucks, stronger on the puck, as you said. Just looks like he fits. Doesn't seem like he's trying to do too much. We'll kind of let the play develop. The poise, the playmaking is all there. He's a guy that, right now, at least with how he's played, I'd keep him in Boston. But as you said, Lysell, Merkulov, all these other guys, I don't think there's an urgency to put them in the lineup if they're not ready or they're not putting their best foot forward, right? It's not like we need Lysell. Listen, the Bruins would be thrilled if Lysell had a hat trick his next game and keeps on stacking good games. And if you can have a guy like that in your lineup on October 8th and you add more skill and potential to your forward core, that'd be great. But I don't think they're in a rush to put him in there if he's not ready, because whether it's Patra, who can play at the wing, whether it's even guys like Geeky or Frederick or someone like that, they do have contingency plans. Lysell is really intriguing, and it would be great if he does kind of run with it and, shores up a part of your lineup that there is a little bit of a vacancy there. But Bruins have options, and they're not going to put in a young guy that either isn't ready or isn't doing enough themselves to show that they deserve a spot on the opening night roster. So, yeah, I don't think there's an urgency or anything like that to get these guys in the lineup when they do have other guys, more steadier options they can turn to.
No, most definitely. And Tyler Johnson, I don't know. I didn't remember if you mentioned him or not. He definitely factors into all of this too, because I think he's played well in camp to this point. And I think he's shown that he's still got some game when he's played in the preseason games. And he does some of the little things, the detail-oriented, like veteran things well too. And I think that was part of Marchand's overall message when talking about the young guys is that, I think they want somebody that's a little more of a veteran guy potentially as an option too. So maybe he's like the 13th guy and Patra makes the team too. And the only other young guy I would say, at this point, seems like he might have a crack of staying, a shot at staying is Riley Duran. If Max Jones is hurt, if there's an injury on a fourth line guy, potentially he could stay as well. But if everybody's healthy, I think he probably starts in Providence, and you have all of those young guys, working and pushing to try to get up to Boston and to work their way up. But I think you're seeing at this point, it would take a Patra level performance from last year's training camp for Lysell, I think, to stick around to the very end and really push on. And I'm just not sure if he's capable of that at this point. We'll see. I mean, he's definitely going to get his chances. But I think having them continue to marinate in Providence and push for time when injuries happen, or if somebody gets complacent or whatever, I think any of that is a really good thing to have. And I think that seems to be the way it's playing out at this point. All right, last question here from Vicken61. Haggs, any surprise so far? Like maybe a Riley Tufte, Cole Kopke, Trevor Kuntar, or even a Jackson Nelson. Also pretty sure there is not enough room for all three or even two of the high-end young players, Lysell, Merkelov, and Patra. Yeah, so who do you see sticking with the varsity? Finally, the goaltending looks real suspect without Swayman. I know he is overreaching with his elite goaltender salary demands, but with Omar gone, it sure looks like he has the advantage in negotiations. He does right now. If they get into the regular season, he really wants to, put the heavy pressure on to try to get what he wants. It's a risk. It could go either way. It could work out really well for him, or it could turn into a situation he doesn't want. I think that is a big gamble on his part if he does that, but he may be willing to do that. As far as any other surprises so far that you've seen in camp, I know we talked about Kuntar a little bit. Anybody else that's caught your eye? I know Cole Kopke had a good game, the first preseason game. Riley Tufte scored a goal. Some of these other guys are showing, I think, that the Providence Bruins are going to have a very strong team this year, and they're going to have a lot of good players that might potentially push for Boston. But anybody else that's really caught your eye to this point in camp?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, I think Kepke's a guy that has stood out. Gets that goal in the first game on Sunday. Had, I think, a team-high 5 hits on the game on Thursday against the Rangers. So, again, is this a guy that's going to be pushing for spot October 8th? Probably not, but in terms of filling out your depth chart further down in the system with Providence, as you said, having some of those guys that should be top 6 players down there that they continue to take steps forward, kind of like Anthony Richard, who was great last year for Providence. Yep. And if you need injuries, those guys can bring up and they can provide value. So I think those are guys worth keeping tabs on as the year goes on and injuries sprout up. I do like Billy Sweezy. I think has been a guy that's been pretty solid so far. He's going to probably be in the mix in terms of, you imagine that it's going to be Parker Weatherspoon as the 7th D, but again, with injuries, all those things, if you're trying to call up some guys, I think a guy like Billy Sweezy, Hanson native, so of course he signs with the Bruins, but has been a guy that has shown some physicality. I think he's got 9 hits in his 2 games. Kind of meat and potatoes kind of defenseman, does his job, knows what he needs to do. I think he's the guy where is he going to be, again, pushing for 40-plus games? Probably not, but if you told me at the beginning of last year Parker Weatherspoon was going to be playing 40-plus games, I'd be like, who? And looked pretty damn good doing it. So I think Billy Sweezy is a guy worth keeping tabs on because he kind of feels like maybe that next man up if there are injuries, which are a given, right, over the course of 82 games. So
especially on the back end, injuries are going to happen. And I'm sure you're right. I think he's going to get playing time. Had some cups of coffee with Columbus when he was there before. Had a fight with Loco. I do remember that. I think it was the first time he played the Bruins.
Yeah.
And, it definitely will play the rough around the edges game. And I think is a good fit as far as a depth guy that will come up and play. And I know the Bruins liked him going back to his draft year. He was undrafted, but I know he was on their list of guys that they were looking at to draft in that draft class. So they've liked him for a long time. And that's kind of the MO with them, is they keep tabs on guys that they like at that point and always watch them. And I think Weatherspoon is probably one of those guys too. And it really makes it them very adept at finding these sort of diamonds in the rough, guys that are in, tough depth, organizational depth situations that are stuck in the AHL or whatever. They do a good job of identifying those players that might be able to come up in the NHL and help. And I think Sweezy's going to be another one of those guys. Connor, thank you very much for joining us. Let's thank our sponsors. Download the Prize Picks app today. That's our good friends at Prize Picks. And use code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Let's also thank Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it, Connor?
Game time.
Game time! All right. Connor, thanks for joining us, my friend.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Everybody else out there, thanks for listening. We'll see you at the rink.